I really believe that art belongs in everyday life, and it isn't something that one should just encounter on Sunday afternoons making a special trip, but that it's something you encounter every day and involved in whatever you might be doing. The kinds of things I deal with, whether I'm working on a smaller piece or a larger piece, and are really fundamentally the same, because it's thinking about the space and how someone's going to encounter the sculpture, how they're going to physically experience it, and the scale relative to the person and the surroundings. And so I've done pieces for people's private homes, and of course that's a much smaller scale, but I'm still thinking about how the piece relates to the scale of the architecture of a building, of a house, or and to the landscape, and then to the individual who's going to be experiencing it. When I work in a public setting, there are additional complexity because of all of the issues of safety and permanence. I really relish the opportunity to work with a particular site and respond to it physically, and also respond to the community that lives and works and plays at the site. It was really wonderful to come to Reston, because I had been there many, many years ago, not quite 50 years ago, but close to the beginning of Reston, when it was just being built. And it was wonderful to come back and revisit the places that I'd seen then, and then see the evolution and the new town center being a much more urban, cosmopolitan feeling kind of environment. And so that was interesting for me to think about in designing the sculpture, because in a sense the site for the sculpture is in a park that's a very natural environment with meandering paths and beautiful plantings and so forth, and a much more informal kind of layout, and yet it's right next to the town center, which has got much more formal, large-scale architecture. To somehow come up with a sculpture that would really fit both this newer development in Reston, but also fit and integrate and flow into the natural setting was very important. There were a number of goals that were identified by the community. The idea of the piece as being a gateway piece, a signal that you're coming to something, to build anticipation. And so that's for someone driving in a car. There's also the goal of attracting people to use the park more, to help create a setting for programs and activities. And that was challenging to think about, and so, but I like challenges. This might suggest like a plant form, stem with a leaf on the end sort of bending in the wind, but it also can be a gesture of a hand or an arm. The work is abstract, which means taking from. So I hope that for me, and I hope for viewers, it evokes images, and in that setting, it's in a sort of open area that's surrounded by very large trees, and so there's an echoing of the forms of the trees and arcing up. I use color in my sculptures. Sometimes I use just the raw material, but I often use color, and it's another expressive element, obviously. And one of the factors in the choice of yellow is the warmth, and that it really expands and comes forward. So in terms of one of the goals for the project being to welcome people and to be a signal that you're approaching a place where you're welcome, yellow is a color that expands and is warm, and I think does precisely that.
My father started Kelco Corporation in 1928, eventually moved out of Baltimore, and we picked up more of the architectural type work, which got us into the artwork. And that seems to be our biggest end right now. Parts were developed from the patterns that Mary Ann gave us. We developed it into a CAD model and then had it plasma cut on a large table. The 3/16 thick aluminum was plasma cut into these shapes in the flat. Worked the edges where the points came out differently to make it blend. Now we are starting the assembly process. We have attached the base together and are working our way around the first unit. Everything will be tack welded together, and then eventually we'll come back and weld the whole seam. After that, the finishing will take place, which will be grinding all those welds into a nice blend and a 1/8 radius around the edges.
It's also, in the fabrication process, I feel like when you curl up a piece of metal, like a spring, there's so much energy in that, and I think that you really feel that. It's almost as if there's a relationship between that physical force and energy in the process of creating the work that's latent in the finished piece, and that you feel that energy. The crew were really, working so hard and using clamps and hydraulic tools and things to bend that metal to come around into that curved form. They are assembling, and it's really stitching it along the edges as the pieces come together by tacking it. And then once the form has been, it's all been tacked together, then I will be looking at it, of course, all along the way. And then at that point, when everything is just the way I want it, and the lines of where the way the edges come together is really flowing properly, and then they'll weld all of those seams. They will go over the seams, at least 3 or 4 passes to build up enough metal so that they'll be able to give a nice radius to the edges of the piece, and that's very, very important. The forms are organic, but I want them to be very clean and hard edged. And after they finish that part of the process, then the piece will be going to a company that will be painting it, and they will be using a fleet paint. It's similar to automotive paint, but it's actually a much more durable and a more high quality product. Another whole layer of complexity is, which I really enjoy, is working with people and a place and the spirit of the place, and just I find that so inspiring and wonderful. It energizes me and keeps me wanting to make sculpture.